You tell me how a president in the middle of a pandemic has got time for this bullshit. Are you kidding me? Hawking.
The recent trade negotiations between the U.S. and China in Stockholm have revealed a schism far deeper than a disagreement over tariffs. It's a battle over who sets the rules of the international system. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The U.S. demand that China cease its oil purchases from Russia and Iran is a prime example of Washington's strategy to use its economic leverage to enforce its foreign policy objectives. However, China's refusal to comply, backed by its own strategic and economic imperatives, signals its determination to forge a new, multipolar world order where it is not subject to U.S. dictates. This clash is a microcosm of a broader geopolitical struggle for global supremacy. China's foreign policy is founded on the principles of sovereignty and non-interference, which have been cornerstones of its diplomatic approach since the 1950s. From China's perspective, U.S. sanctions and tariff threats are a direct violation of these principles. The Chinese Foreign Ministry's statement that coercion and pressure will not lead to anything is not just rhetoric. It is a restatement of a long-held belief that each nation has the right to manage its own affairs without external pressure. China views the U.S. attempt to dictate its energy partners as a blatant infringement on this core principle, especially when those partnerships are vital to its own economic and national security. For China, the decision to continue buying oil from Russia and Iran is a matter of pure economic and strategic logic. As the world's largest oil importer, China's primary goal is to ensure a stable, secure, and affordable energy supply to fuel its vast industrial and manufacturing sectors. Both Russia and Iran, under heavy sanctions, are reliable suppliers of heavily discounted crude oil. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, estimates that between 80 to 90% of Iran's oil exports go to China, averaging over 1 million barrels per day. The KSE Institute notes that Chinese imports of Russian oil have also surged, rising 20% to more than 1.3 million barrels per day in April. For Beijing, walking away from these fire sale prices would not only compromise its energy security, but also saddle its economy with higher costs, hindering its growth and global competitiveness. The U.S. strategy, while intended to cripple the economies of its adversaries, is being undermined by a growing network of nations and financial mechanisms that bypass the dollar-dominated system. To circumvent Western sanctions, China has been actively promoting the use of its own currency, the renminbi, RMB, in international trade, particularly with Russia and Iran. This process of de-dollarization is a key part of China's long-term strategy to reduce its vulnerability to U.S. financial leverage. This shift is also supported by the use of a shadow fleet of tankers that operate outside of standard shipping regulations to transport sanctioned oil. This robust and secretive network highlights the ineffectiveness of the U.S. sanctions regime when faced with determined and resourceful opposition from major global players. The standoff also reveals the limits of U.S. power in a multipolar world. The fact that President Trump is making similar threats to India, another major consumer of Russian oil, underscores this point. The U.S. is not just dealing with one defiant nation, but a growing bloc of countries, including China, India, Russia, and Iran, that are increasingly coordinating their efforts to resist Western pressure. This dependent authoritarian convergence is creating interconnected frameworks of economic dependence and technological collaboration that are strengthening their collective resilience against U.S. sanctions. The outcome of the oil dispute between the U.S. and China will therefore serve as a critical barometer of the shifting global power dynamics and a test of whether the U.S. can continue to unilaterally enforce its will on the world stage. The broader geopolitical context and the reshaping of global alliances. The oil dispute is more than a simple trade spat. It is a manifestation of a deeper strategic competition between the U.S. and China. For Washington, the objective is to isolate and financially cripple what it views as revisionist powers, Russia, and Iran that challenge the U.S.-led liberal international order. This strategy is based on the premise that U.S. economic and financial dominance gives it the right to set the rules of international commerce. By threatening China with punitive tariffs, the U.S. is attempting to force Beijing to adhere to these rules, effectively conscripting it into its campaign of economic warfare. China, however, views this as a direct infringement on its sovereignty and a challenge to its rising power. Its refusal to comply is a powerful declaration that it will not be a pawn in Washington's geopolitical chess game. Beijing's foreign policy is guided by a principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other nations and a focus on building economic partnerships that serve its own interests, regardless of U.S. sanctions. This stance resonates with many developing nations that feel Western powers have historically used their economic might to impose their will. The Chinese Foreign Ministry's statement that coercion and pressure will not lead to anything is a direct rebuke of this U.S. strategy and a signal of a new era in international relations. The oil standoff also underscores the growing strategic alignment between China and Russia. Despite some economic headwinds, their relationship has deepened since the start of the war in Ukraine. China has become Russia's most important economic partner, providing a vital market for its energy and a source of consumer goods that are no longer available from the West. This relationship is not merely transactional. It is part of a broader effort by both nations to counter what they see as U.S. hegemony. By continuing to buy Russian and Iranian oil, China is demonstrating its commitment to this partnership and its willingness to endure U.S. pressure to maintain it. Furthermore, the dispute highlights the vulnerability of global energy supply chains. China's reliance on maritime routes, particularly the Strait of Hormuz, makes it susceptible to geopolitical disruptions. Iran's threat to close the strait in response to U.S. actions, for example, would have a catastrophic impact on China's economy. While China opposed that specific move, it also understands a need to diversify its supply lines to reduce dependence on vulnerable choke points. This is why it has invested heavily in alternative routes, such as the new transcontinental rail link with Iran to bypass traditional sea lanes. This move is a long-term strategic play to enhance its energy security and reduce its exposure to potential U.S. naval blockades in the event of a future conflict. The conflict over oil is not just a tactical disagreement, but a fundamental clash of strategic visions. The U.S. seeks to maintain a unipolar world order, while China is a leading voice for a more multipolar system where power is distributed among several major players. The outcome of this standoff will be a powerful indicator of which vision will ultimately prevail.